So next up, I think we've got Wenting. Yes, yeah, we've got Wenting. Welcome, Wenting. So you're talking about setting green boundaries for Chinese green finance, a multi-level governance and regulatory stringency approach. So no regressions, I suspect, which is great. Yeah, it's we embrace multi-methods here in Ceph Group. So over to you. You're joining us from ANU, I understand. I can't hear you right now.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. I'll share my screen first. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's my great pleasure to join this symposium. And as mentioned, there is no quantitative analysis in this research. It's really a qualitative analysis about green finance regulation in general in China. And for myself, my name is Wenting Cheng, and I'm currently a Grand Challenge Research Fellow at the Australian National University College of Law. I'm working on the Grand Challenge project, Zero Carbon Energy for the Asia Pacific. And as a tradition, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. Here I'm in Canberra and Ngunnawal people, and pay my respect to their past, present, and emerging. So in this short presentation, I will first discuss the background of this paper, which is not accepted, but under review by Environmental Policy and Governance. I've done almost second revision and conditional acceptance at the moment. If I will talk about some of the comments later, and I appreciate comments from colleagues here as well. After that, after the background, I will discuss the analytical framework here, which I use multi-level governance to discuss how different levels of government, central government and the provincial government, as well as the pilot zones that set the green finance standard. And then I will talk about how the multi-level negotiations as well as coordinations has impacted regulatory stringency. And then I will conclude with some insights from the paper. So green finance, as I mentioned, I will focus on the regulatory aspect. As we all know, in particular, maybe colleagues in this room, green finance has globally been recognized as a driving force for sustainability. And in the early stage, it was motivated by investors and consumers through the divestment movement. But more recently, the literature has focused on the role of different regulators, in particular, central banks who take the role of deepening our understanding of climate risks and framing them as financial risks, as well as effectively safeguarding financial systems, phasing out funding for fossil fuels, and increasing the funding for new green economy. However, as pointed by Neil Cunningham in his publication in 2020, the involvement of the central banks, he described it as a quiet revolution, but indeed the resilience of this quiet revolution depends on a multi-instrumental approach, which involves networked regulators. So in this paper, I've kind of developed his idea to see how in the Chinese context, different actors has been involved, and also use the concept of regulatory stringency to see what is the outcome of this multilateral negotiation. The focus of this paper is about setting the green standard for green finance. And you can see from the first here that there is a quote, 2012, which was published by OECD working paper. At that time, it says that the definition related to green investment are variously also referred to clean, sustainable, and climate change investment. To the stage now, we can see that there are more clear delineation about how these different concepts means. But I think the second problem that this paper has mentioned is still there. So the green definition or green scope in different contexts, they can be explicit or implicit. They can be broad and generic or technical and specific. So really the devils are in the details, and it's very important to see what is included and what is not included and on what basis. So I think this is very important at this stage to, in particular, to prevent greenwashing. If we see greenwashing as activities that misrepresent the greenness, we really need to ask, like, what is the standard for green? And in the Europe, we can see that the taxonomy has really been the major regulatory approach. This has been science-based metrics to provide guidance for delineating the boundaries of green finance. And in 2020, there has been technical expert group who publish over 600 pages of report for the scientific basis for the green taxonomy. And in the Chinese context, we see that China has been the largest emitter in the world, as well as the dramatic growth of green loans as well as green bonds. So with this dramatic increase of the numbers, I think it is important to reflect on what is defined as green activities or green investment in the Chinese context. So there are two research questions in this paper. First is who sets the green boundaries for Chinese green finance and how they do that? And second question is how the activities of setting green boundaries has impacted on regulatory stringency. So for the concept of regulatory stringency, we adopted the definition by Judge Lord 2020 publication, which is a study regulatory stringency of forestry certifications. And the definition for regulatory stringency includes three aspects: regulatory scope, prescriptiveness of the standards, as well as the performance. For the purpose of this paper, it's more relevant that we see regulatory stringency as regulatory scopes. And for multi-level governance, we use it as an analytical framework for this paper, which means the different arrangement of policy-making activities that go within and across national levels between different regulatory actors. So why we use this multi-level governance as an analytical framework for this paper, I think, so first of all, for the issues that we are researching here is about setting green boundaries. And at the national level, which here I quote the first regulation issued in 2016, the guidelines for establishing green finance system, which provided a very broad definition for what constitutes as green investment. So it's listed in fields of environmental protection, energy conservation, clean energy, green transportation, and green buildings. But it is not very clear like what activities exactly within that. So it depends on implementation. And then we see that in the Chinese context, it's not only the central government, but also local government as well as experimental pilots are involved in this process of providing a clearer definition for which activities are or should be included in green finance. So that is how that the multi-level governance can be applied, because there are multi-level regulators involved in this process. But also, more broadly, I've been looking at the literature on multi-level governance, which initially started for the process of European integration, but it has been increasingly applied to different jurisdictions because it's beyond the methodological nationalism. So we don't only look at the national regulators, but also subnational regulators, which makes it applicable to the Chinese context, even though that some literature say that the Chinese authoritarianism is different from the Western style democratic system, but still we say that it's more, as the literature says, fragmented authoritarianism. So it's not just one regulator there. That's why it can be applicable. And second reason is that this process, the multi-level governance, is really looking at the dynamics between different levels of regulators. So it provides a lens to observe the contestation in the process of regulation, which makes it interesting to look at the Chinese case. So for the first question, who sets green boundaries in China? This is kind of a map about the regulatory structure. We say that at the national level, there are 7 regulators which were initially involved in the 2016 document of establishing a green finance system in China. These later reduced to 6 regulators because here the Chinese Banking Regulatory Commission and the Chinese Insurance Regulatory Commission merged in 2018 in the institutional reshuffle. So at the moment, there are 6 central level ministries, but also we look at the policies that were issued by the provinces. We say that 23 out of 31 provinces has issued some of their own guidelines for green finance development. And we have access to 17 of the policies to look at what are listed as green finance within their definition. So at the provincial level, we also see the differences, which are the regulators at the provincial level who issue the policies. Some are issued by the province government and as well as the branches of the People's Bank of China, but others were issued by the functional department within the provinces. So And the third level, this is quite new. So the green finance pilot zones, at the moment, there are 9 pilot zones in 5 provinces. They are more temporary and informal institutions that were engaged mainly in regulatory experiments, so that they can generate some of the useful knowledge for the central government to make more broader decisions and to replicate some of their successful experience and avoid some of the pitfalls that they have done in the experiment. So what is important is here the green finance pilot zones, they are directly affiliated to the central government. So although all of them are located in different provinces, but they don't report to the province. They report directly on this specific issue to the central government. That's why I list them here as an independent level of regulator. In the Chinese context, we need to differentiate green credits and green bonds. So in the case of green credits, the regulation is more general. So this is the main policy in 2012, the green credit guidelines issued it described more general activities or the purposes for green credits to improve environmental social risk management, as well as to reject lending to clients who hasn't complied with environmental and social performance requirements. But there is no list of what activities should the green credit be given. So in this paper, we argue that this is really a process of responsibility shift. So instead of the central government here, it's mainly the People's Bank of China to issue a clear guideline about what green credits should be given, the criteria. It is the responsible has been shifted to the banks. So the banks, they are responsible to assessing the environmental risks and monitoring environmental impacts. And for the purpose of implementing this role, the ICBC, which is Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, itself established its own methodology and models to calculate environmental risks, to what extent they will transform into financial risks. So we can say that there is nothing really to look at in the context of multi-level governance. But the case in green bonds is quite different. So in 2015, there were a green bond catalog, the catalog for projects eligible for green bonds in China. And the catalog was revised in 2021. We can have a look at what is included or really what has been eliminated. I think the focus should be on here. So the minus symbol represents the activities that has been eliminated in the latest version in 2021. So we can see that coal-fired power station upgrade and other fossil fuel related activities has been eliminated entirely in this 2021 version. While some of the activities which can be controversial in a way, in particular for carbon capture and storage, but these are kind of newly listed activities, as well as hydrogen usage or hydrogen related production. has been included in this catalog. So this gives you a sense about the difference or the in the area of green bond, the definition for green can be very specific. This is only the second level of activities. There is a more specific list to the fourth level. So in a way, it's kind of similar to the European approach to have a taxonomy, but only much more broader. And here it leads to our question about if in the case of green bonds, there are explicit catalogs which evolved between the period of 2015 and 2021. So how the local government kind of responds to this, or what happened at the provincial level during this period. So we looked at what was included in the green finance policies at different provinces, and the time frame was exactly between the two catalogs at the national level. We say that, as I mentioned, we had access to 17 of the policies which are publicly available. So we see here prominently that in Xinjiang, clean coals were included, and also in Sichuan and Hebei and Shanxi province. So these are activities that were not explicitly mentioned in the national level, but through the implementation, maybe it's the priorities for the province's development. They have expanded the clean coals in their catalog as eligible activities for green bonds. And we didn't see, sorry, there was a line that maybe this table was not properly positioned. So there was a case that in Hainan province, traveling industry has been listed there, and it's not in the national catalog at all. So we can say that there are kind of negotiation between provinces and the national level government in terms of setting the green boundaries. Here we can say that energy conservation and clean energy was explicitly mentioned in the guidelines 2016, but certain ambiguities remain. So to what percentage energy conservation can be eligible to be supported, it's not clear. So that gives some policy space for provinces to articulate what can be included or not. But we say the pattern for the provinces, they do have a list, but we see none of them have their kind of completely independent list, which is independent from the national government. We didn't see that. What we say is that the first very vaguely mentioned or mentioned in passing that the kind of comply with the national standards or national policies, but they didn't mention the name of the national policy. So this sort of vague reference, and then instead of having their own list of activities. They say that based on the national policy, these are the priorities in our province. So we see this kind of subtlety through, as I mentioned, weak reference and priority making for some of the provinces to subtly include activities such as clean coal in their provincial guidelines. Hebei and Shanxi, they issued the guideline quite late. In 2020, China has already made the pledge that it will reach, or it will try to reach carbon peaking in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2060. So in that context, these two provinces still included clean coal in their guidelines. However, we see a pushback by the national government because in the 2021 guideline, as I showed, all fossil fuel related activities has been eliminated. So it also requires provinces to obey the guidelines. So as I will discuss, this is how the regulatory stringency has been maintained in the end by this 2021 catalog. Another issue I will show you is about the pilot zones, which is called the Green Finance Innovation and Reform Pilot Zones in China. They are, in terms of regulations, they are regulatory experiments to gain more knowledge about how to implement a specific issue. So in the context of multi-level governance, this is a process of knowledge co-production, both flowing up and flowing down. So I think in this context, it is more important for the local knowledge in the sense of their experiences and lessons associated with green finance to be fed up in the national level for broader policy making. And I can show you what was included in the experiment and in the regulatory experiment. So these are three examples about three pilots. They've done experiments about setting green standards. Here we see Huzhou, Guangzhou, and Gui'an Xinqu in Guizhou province. So they've identified different methods, indicators, and how they will categorize the outcome and whether there are exclusion criteria. Attention should be paid in this case, the Gui'an case. So the guidelines are they are qualitative, and the activities within the guidelines, which is not shown in the table, includes investment in energy conservation, emission reduction, circular economy, and ecological protection. So the energy conservation part was kind of not really approved by the national government, but they still mention this. And also they use qualitative methods, and also the categories of outcome are either eligible or ineligible. Compared with other in Huzhou, it's like they are kind of a rating system about light green, medium green, and dark green. So what happened in this experiment is that the local government wanted to guide green criteria, which is more useful for their local industrial development, instead of really to promote to help with emission reduction. So the central government kind of giving a prize of other pilots about their achievements, and the Gui'an case, they were just not mentioned in that these experience are replicable and promotable at the national level. So this kind of quiet ignorance is detrimental to the Gui'an pilots, because these are informal and temporary governance level. So if an experiment is not successful, they will not be listed as pilots maybe in the next round. So I think this is how the central government can still control knowledge production or regulatory in the pilot zones. As a summary, because the paper is about regulatory stringency, we say that multi-level governance itself does not give legitimacy to what kind of scope green finance should include. So in that way, the definition can be compromised through the negotiation between central and local government. But ultimately, at the time of writing, which is the end of last year, 2021, when the Green Bond Catalog 2021 were issued, we say that the regulatory stringency was not compromised, because in the Chinese case, the coordinating power of the central government is stronger. So the 2021 catalog, they can prescribe or ask the local government to align their definitions or their green bond criteria to the national level. And also we say the strong influence of the transnational network. For instance, the Green Bond Initiative, they have kind of using the strategy of naming and shaming, as well as the endorsement through certifications, to say that certain percentage of Chinese defined green bonds are not eligible for their definition. And the percentage, we say that this kind of shaming really works, and the percentage actually of Chinese green finance definition not compatible to the CBI decreased every year. And in 2021, in the Green Bond Catalog press conference, the Chinese officials say that because we want to align with international standards, that's why fossil fuels has been eliminated. And we also see a strong cross-issue influence, as I mentioned, the carbon neutrality and also the decarbonization policies has played a very important role in making the Chinese green definition more stringent. Yeah, so I think I've already run out of time. These are